Hello everyone and welcome to this very special Race Department panel discussion as part of our build-up to the SRO eSport GT AM Championship final later today at Bathurst. Now, the purpose of this discussion is to get some insight into the future of esports and sim racing in general from both the real world and the virtual worlds. Joining us on today's panel is Anthony Comas from the SRO Motorsports Group. He is the Marketing and Business Development Manager there. We are very lucky to have the co-founder of Kunos, Marco Massarutto. We have sim racing YouTuber Chris Haye and someone who needs very little introduction indeed, Mr. Paul Jeffrey. Okay, now before we get into all the really meaty questions, I'm going to start with a nice and easy one, and this comes from many of the Race Department members. And I'm going to start with Marco. Your favourite ACC car and track combination?
Wow, tough question. I would say Porsche 911 in Suzuka. That is as much as frustrating as great.
Okay, Chris?
When you can manage it.
I think it'd have to be the AMG GT3 at Zandvoort. I just love trying to hustle the front end, that really heavy engine through some of those mid and low speed corners.
Great car, not so keen on the track. Paul, what about you?
Oh, I've got to go for Aston Martin. Nothing to do with the way it is in game. It could be absolutely awful for all it matters to me. It's an Aston Martin, and I love Aston Martins on any track. But if I had to pick one, Silverstone, home of the British Grand Prix.
Great choice. And Anthony, what about yourself?
I think I'd have to meet with Marco on the Porsche, but I'd go for Kalami. I think that the track is just like no other, and the Porsche, the noise. I think it's a perfect fit there.
I have to agree with you. The noise of the Porsche is just awesome, both in real life and in game. But yeah, let's get into it then. So the first question is a tough one, I think, for Anthony, and really, it's around how real-world motorsports are coping with this current situation. So with COVID restrictions forcing the motorsport fraternity to adopt esports where they may not have been inclined to do so prior to the crisis, what role does esports play for the wider motorsports landscape and specifically SRO after the restrictions have been lifted?
Well, I mean, I think for the majority of the manufacturers, it will slowly but surely become an integral part of their motorsport strategy. I think there's no denial that we are seeing a slow demise of factory racing in motorsport on platforms that are promoting naturally combustion engines, and manufacturers will now be focusing on electric racing and customer racing, and I think there's with what happened in the last couple of months, there's been created a real place for sim racing and esports, because a lot of the manufacturers have discovered this environment that they really knew very little about. We've shown how close it can get to the reality, and all pro drivers has also very much legitimized that. So for sure, manufacturers are only going to increase involvement on that side. And it's also a great tool for them to be able to target a younger audience, which they're all very much after. And I think seeing the immediate implication and involvement of Bentley in our esports program is the best testimony of that. I mean, Bentley joined motorsports of GT3 in 2014 with one real purpose: is for the Bentleys to look like a car that a 30-year-old want to drive and not just a 60-year-old wants to drive. And esports is bringing that one step further, and so it was a perfect match for them. I think they've loved their experience with their new experience with sim racing, and I can tell you, I mean, I've had the majority of all our manufacturers racing in real life contact me in recent months, and I think there's a bright future, and there's going to be certainly a much greater involvement from the manufacturers, and we are fully embracing that. And esports is not just a short-term strategy to keep our head out of the water in these tough times, but a long-term strategy where we're putting a lot of resources for the many years to come.
Well, that's a brilliant answer and just what I wanted to hear. And I can say for myself that actually, the effect that Bentley wanted has worked on me. I would personally never have driven the Bentley in any sim or even really wanted one as a consumer, but actually I find myself driving it a lot and actually really liking the Bentley. So they've done their job there, which is great. But Chris, what do you think the motorsport, the real world motorsport teams and organisations have to do to keep the eyes on esports post restrictions are being lifted? What can they do to make it a bit easier to understand?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say to Anthony, it's great to hear that SRO is building esports into its long-term plan. I think a lot of our viewers are going to be wanting to hear that. I think there is a concern amongst sim racers that this is a bit of a bubble we're in at the moment for obvious reasons. But I think one of the key things we have to do as promoters of the sport, as people involved in the broadcasting of this kind of thing as well, is that I think we're not doing a good enough job telling the stories. People watch real world motorsport because it's man versus machine. We don't really have the machine element in sim racing, so I think we need to do a better job of telling the story of individuals. And I think that's a big focus for me at the moment is we need to find some heroes. We need to find stories we can tell throughout all of these events.
Yeah, obviously you're not referring to the SRO AM Championship where we've done an absolutely fantastic job of that. But yeah, no, I completely agree. I find it difficult to see who is the best esports racers. I mean, there are drivers out there that get a lot of publicity for being involved in certain series, but actually it's not really doesn't really tell us if they're the best at esports and sim racing in general. So it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But Paul, interested to hear your thoughts on that. Have you got anything to add to what Chris has said? Is there any way that you would feel that we could make it easier for people to understand and follow?
Well, to echo what Chris said in relation to Anthony's comment about it's great to see that esports is not just a short-term thing in the current climate. That is fabulous to hear. It's been industry is the wrong word, but it's been something that we've all been involved with to a lesser or greater degree for a number of years. So it's fabulous to see so many eyes are now being placed on that because of the situation that we live in. And we're starting to get a lot more uptake and a lot more acknowledgement, I think, from real world manufacturers. What I'd like to see going forward is that interest start to be solidified in actually investing time, resource, effort, and a level of professionalism from these real world manufacturers. So we've seen, I think it's fair to say, a light touch approach from people such as Bentley, Ferrari, Mercedes, or whatever it is in whatever series up to this point. And I know when I've spoken to some people in years gone by, it's fair to say there's been an element of not quite sure what esports is, not quite sure what sim racing is. And I think that now they will have a much, much stronger understanding of what our sport is and what benefits they can get out of it from a manufacturer and business point of view. But from an end user, from a consumer, I will hope that brings more prestige. It makes it easier for people like Marco to go out there and secure licenses for simulations. We can see more variety of content that we can drive as sim racers, and also will up the professionalism, engagement and social sharing of various different championships to get it in front of a larger audience, because the larger the audience, the more cool things you can do, the more involvement you've got. And for me, that's great.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And actually, funnily enough, I saw a tweet in the week, and it was directed at a particular brand motorsport team. And it was generally saying, you've missed the boat here, guys. You could have had your car in game, but for whatever reason, their cars have never appeared in game, and now there's a big event happening and they're not featured in the game, and they must be absolutely livid that they didn't take it a bit more seriously. So yeah, I'm super happy to hear from Anthony to say that, you know, it's a long-term ambition and objective to keep the esports going. So that's fantastic. But Marco, I know a lot of people are wondering how Kunos have been affected during this time and what challenges it's thrown up for you with these restrictions, maybe people not being able to work in the studio together, and how's it affected Kunos?
Well, like I used to say, people usually can see only the top of the iceberg and not what there is behind that is huge. So when the bombshell of COVID happened, we were already committed to several paths. That was the current maintenance of the Assetto Corsa Competizione system to release the updating and the patches on the regular basis. We were committed to the production of the GT4 pack that will arrive on July. Another part of the team is committed to work on the British track pack that will arrive next winter. And last but not least, there is the console version of ACC that will arrive on June 23. That required a lot of work for optimization, submissions, approval, all the marketing stuff, and so on. So when the COVID arrived, I think that we have been, let me say, lucky. Lucky because 3 years ago with SRO we chosen to create possibly the best possible racing series, that is in our case the GT series. When me and Anthony met for the first time in London, it was like we already met several times and we already had a lot of discussions, because we were keen to make a simulation, a product that was completely dedicated to 360 degrees to a series, in order to make something that was specific. And SRO at that time was really embeddedly looking for an official video game, let me say video game, of their series. Like there is the official game of MotoGP and Formula 1 and WRC. They really wanted to have something like that. So it was a perfect marriage, because we wanted the same things. And by the very beginning, we started to work on the GT series series with Assetto Corsa Competizione in a way that could be able to support broadcasting, online racing, in a way how we could effectively support the esport. So when the COVID arrived, we were ready, actually. We have been very, very busy because, like I said, we were very busy on several and separate partners. But we didn't had to make a huge job to modify Competizione in a way how to support the esports, because the esports was already there. The difference was that finally people, in terms of mass audience, in terms of federations, in terms of motorsport team, recognized that there was something out there except for the real motorsport. So the bigger challenge actually we had to face was about the servers capability, because during the COVID, the traffic on the servers, on the sales of the new users of Competizione that jumped on board, rised to 300% than before. And since the leaderboard and ranking and rating system in Competizione is very complex and it manages a lot of data, we needed to work even more in order to keep the servers stable and reliable. Also because in the same time, after I think March and mid of April, Steam, exactly like Netflix or other media providers, had to reduce the broadband in order to keep as many as possible online, but reducing the quality of the streams, of the broadband, and so on. So we had to face several challenges, one by one. In all of these, people like Charles Leclerc or Valentino Rossi jumped on board also on Competizione, not only with their official games. And Assetto Corsa Competizione starts to have a huge visibility also on channels like Eurosport or Sky Sport Formula 1, with live events and so on, that needed our attention and our management. I have to say that without the support of our partner, not only SRO, but also ACAP Informatica, it would have been really challenging to us to being able to manage all these activities, all these several paths. So we are very happy about these achievements. I have to say that I'm a bit sad that, but not just for Kunos or for Competizione, but in general, that we needed a pandemic in order to make sim racing visible. Because I had several meetings also during the winter before the COVID with a lot of organizations and federations that recognize that sim racing is not just a video game, it's something more. And all of them all together decided to jump on board. But actually doing anything than trying to organizing things, but letting to companies like Codemasters, iRacing, Kunos Simulazioni to do the dirty job. Where we are pushing about the sim racing concept by 15 years or even more. So I would say that it would have been great if the motorsport in general would have recognized that sim racing is something serious, even without a pandemic. But let's take the good and forget the rest.
Absolutely. It's incredible, the fact that it's taken this to really shine a spotlight on it. It's always kind of been my geeky little hobby, which I've kept to myself, because having a rig in your bedroom or your living room is it's not the prettiest of things to have, right, in your house. So it's always usually tucked away. But now it's all of a sudden it's become pretty cool, and everyone can't wait for the restrictions to be lifted to come and have a go on it, because they're asking about it, and it's a shame. But look, I just that point I made about that team who must be kicking themselves that they didn't have their car represented in any games. Anthony, you must be delighted that you've got such an incredible game as ACC representing SRO right now.
I mean, absolutely, and I think as Marco said, we could not have on our side had better partners. I mean, Kunos have done a phenomenal job with this game, and after watching our Spa esports broadcast, which was round 2, if I'm not wrong, and at one point just the onboards, the dust on the windscreen, the sun setting, I mean, it was surreal, and I immediately wrote to Marco and Davide, with whom I'm in regular contact, and I said, guys, I mean, what you've done is it is just unbelievable. I mean, you can barely tell the difference between virtual and reality. And we have a perfect product tailored around a series. The level of replication between real and virtual is unbelievable. So we could not have hoped for anything better.
I'm sure there's no luck involved. It's totally judgment here, but to have Kunos on your side, they're probably the only developers out there which I can see that could deliver both something as beautiful as ACC and deliver the driving experience as well. I mean, I'm sure other developers are going to catch up at some point, but ACC just looks absolutely fantastic at the moment. So, well done, Marco, and everyone at Kunos. Okay, so moving on to a slightly different topic, and it's really directed at Paul and Chris and content production. Obviously, with COVID and the restrictions in place, we've had a lot of real world drivers taking to streaming and creating content for themselves. How do you see that playing out over the next few years? Do you think it's when the restrictions are lifted, these guys are going to go back to real world racing and they're not going to have time for it, or are they going to double down? Is there a place for the Lando Norrises, Charles Leclercs, and people like that, plus the guys like you, like Chris, Paul, Jimmy Broadbent? How do you see that landscape playing out?
Well, I think there are sort of two groups already, in the sense that the Lando Norrises of this world were already streaming before COVID came along. It's just that not nearly as many people were paying attention. Charles Leclerc is obviously a godsend to sim racers at the moment, and a natural streamer as well. In fact, just before we came on this, I saw he was streaming a kart race live for the first time, testing a go-kart. I mean, who does that? I mean, the level of access as a Formula One fan that I'm getting today in early 2020 is orders of magnitude better than it was 6 months ago, which is incredible. Some of these guys are going to keep doing it, of course. As I said, Lando, Max Verstappen were already streaming beforehand in a much more casual way, because allegedly Formula One takes a little bit of time out of your schedule. But there are also other streamers we've seen, like David Perel and Nikki Team, who have seen the value in sim racing earlier on and have built their sort of streaming before all of this came along. I expect them to continue doing so. And I expect to see a bunch of the Formula One drivers who found they enjoy it, and it's a good way of building their own personal brand as well to continue doing so.
Paul, any thoughts on that? Anything else to add?
Yeah, I think Chris made some really good points. I think for me, I really enjoyed that level of access. So I kind of got into Formula One and motor racing more specifically in a big way in the 90s. So back then, very little television coverage. You kind of did all your catching up through magazines like Autosport or similar. So it always felt like they were a bit on a pedestal, these racing drivers. You didn't really know who the real people were, apart from a well-crafted PR persona that you get in scheduled meetings during race events and broadcast on TV. So what I really loved is seeing these real-world drivers behind the curtain, seeing the things like the massive amount of preparation that went into some of the IndyCar stars for when they did their recent Indy 500, seeing the likes of Jenson Button in the SRO Esport Pro Series, for example, and also seeing a bit behind the curtain of general normal sim racers that are doing streaming, that have got eyes on. So our AM series is amateur drivers in the SRO Championship. And I've seen a lot of their streams and the preparation, the level of care and dedication that they put into their events. It's just been fascinating, Steve, to see people doing what they love, what we sharing, but seeing the real them without the corporate, without having the PR person stood next to them, telling them what they should and shouldn't say and make sure they say all the brand names and everything. They're just being the real them. And I'm loving that aspect of it. It's a new way to consume their personality. And as Chris said, builds their brand.
Yeah, I agree. But the question is, Paul, when are you going to start streaming?
I am going to start streaming when the days become 62 hours long. Is when I shall do mine, because time is not my friend. But yeah, very soon, very soon. I've got to try and avoid swearing, though, and stuff, which is really, as a Northern Englishman, incredibly difficult for long periods of time.
Well, I can't wait to see you on stream sometime soon, Paul. But just quickly, from both Chris and Paul, what's your take on the way that the real-world drivers have treated esports? Obviously, some have taken it very, very seriously, but others not so. Any thoughts on how the real-world drivers have done during this period?
Yeah, I'll take that to start with. I think it has exposed how some people comport themselves as individuals, as human beings, and as business people. I think we've seen an older generation of drivers. It's really interesting, who've really taken to the esports thing. They've seen it as a way of getting involved, getting some racing in, and having some fun. Whereas some of the current drivers maybe haven't taken it as seriously, while others have. I find the whole dynamic really fascinating. But it does become very obvious very quickly who is a really through and through racing driver. You know, there are people in there. Let's look at Fernando Alonso, who turned up in a whole bunch of series about a week ago, dominated everything in just a way that is so Fernando Alonso, isn't it? It just, you kind of knew that as soon as he said, yeah, all right, I'll do this, that he was just going to come along and be right at the front the whole time. Whereas other guys, you see really, really fast guys who are running around maybe 2 or 3 seconds off the pace. And you think, well, you haven't really put in the same prep time. You know, you can imagine that Fernando Alonso's done thousands of hours of practice for those races to get there and compete at the front, whereas others perhaps haven't. And I quite like the fact that some of them haven't, because it gives me hope. And I can look and I can see, a Formula One world champion driving around, and he's not managing the same lap times as me. And I think that's the best thing that's happened to me in 2020.
Are you saying you're throwing your name into the hat for the Mercedes F1 Drive 2021?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I thought as much. Paul, any thoughts on how the real world drivers have taken to esports?
I've been tremendously surprised with a number of series are running almost all of their real-world drivers. And you see things like, we saw the Australian V8 supercars have got a championship, and the same names that are winning in the real series are running to the front. And I think a racing driver is a racing driver. It's something that that's an obvious statement, by the way. That's something that I've been trying to say for such a long time. If you're good, you're good. And the medium that you're using, if you're driving your real-world car that you drive day in, day out, you're jumping in a go-kart, or you're going into a sim, the level of quality of all the simulations nowadays is to such a degree that they are transferable skills. And that's been proven now by the real-world drivers getting in there. The fast guys are at the front, the slower guys are at the back. And it's really showing us that we, as end users, we're driving something like ACC. we're getting an experience that's incredibly comparable to the real world thing. And frankly, for me, I know everybody's different. I sim race not to be able to wave around at the end and say, look at me, I'm the best. I sim race because that's close as I can get to real racing. I want that.
You like to be feel like a racing driver for a couple of hours, right?
Yeah, I don't have the time, inclination, or budget to go race a Porsche 911 GT3 in the GT World Challenge. So I can fire up my rig upstairs when I've been given 5 minutes freedom by the wife to use it. I can go and simulate that, and the closer we can get to it, the happier boy I am, and that's what I've found.
Yeah, good stuff. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit now, and this is a question for Anthony, and it's, I suppose, a bit of a tricky one. It's a significant day in the history of Britain, actually, with this is going to be the second month straight where Britain hasn't used any coal for powering the country, which is a significant step in moving towards a greener future. But obviously that's been obvious in real-world racing as well, with a number of high-profile teams quitting motorsport series and in favour of electric forms of motor racing. How do you see the next decade playing out for real-world motorsport?
It's absolutely right. The days where manufacturers can spend tens of millions of euros in promoting internal combustion engine cars is close to reaching an end at an alarming pace. But motorsport is not going to stop there, and I think there's two real avenues that manufacturers will pursue. It is electric racing and alternative energy. I'm sure hydrogen will come in quite quickly, and customer racing. In customer racing remains a very important part of their motorsport portfolio. They manage to generate substantial amounts of visibility and marketing return for little investment, if any. Very successful customer racing programs. Manufacturers can break even if they make a bit of money. They use that money to support teams that run as semi-factory teams for them, and so help them with factory drivers, with support packages. So it's a balancing way to keep on generating marketing value without spending really much money. And I think the manufacturers have two focal points. It's innovation, which the box gets ticked with the likes of Formula E and other electric championships that are going to come on the horizon. But the other one is tradition, and Porsche sells cars because they need tradition, and that's a key part of the brand. And so both of these in parallel, can work very well together. Electric cars, I'm sure you can have some close racing, the thrills, but it's going to take a while until people can get the sensations that they have with the smell, the vibrations, that feeling you have in a V12. And I think that there's no doubt that the last natural combustion engine car will be a racing car. It's going to become more of an object of let's say art, and just like in the watch industry, we had the arrival of quartz watches, which are a lot more accurate, a lot cheaper than mechanical watches. Yet we still wear mechanical watches and spend fortunes on it because it's a beauty. It's an object that that drives passion, and it's going to be exactly the same with racing cars. We no longer need horses to move, but we're still racing horses. So I think that there's still a bright future for both. For sure, the substantial investment will go towards alternative energy, and right now the fashionable one is electric. But customer racing still has a long and bright future in parallel to that.
Well, that's music to my ears. It means I can sleep easy tonight. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say I want my road car to be electric, but my motorsport to be petrol. And customer racing, if we can keep that going in the form of SRO for as many years possible, that would be absolutely fantastic. But Marco,
I have to say,
yes, please.
We are also, in parallel, taking measures to go in that direction. And we have this project we're planning on launching very soon called the GTX World Tour, which will be strictly for alternative energy cars, starting with electric. But for us, as it stands right now, making a bunch of electric GT cars to run on a circuit, it doesn't work. It's no fun. The technology for now doesn't allow it, to go long enough. Swapping cars in the middle, we don't really see the point. So the idea was to do this world tour, which will be linking from city to city with special stages at the different. So you start from Paris, then go by Montlhéry, where we'll have 20-minute track session there, going to Reims, having a hill climb on the way, and going from city to city with the cars being on display. Nice. In the best city center squares in each town. And I think city a tour like a Tour de France spirit, and cities will be very welcoming. And the idea is to showcase that some of the electric stuff may seem a bit dull at the moment, but there is some exciting stuff that manufacturers are developing, and bringing some of the cars of tomorrow and the prototypes that manufacturers are working on to the city center, and bringing this technology to the people rather than dragging the people to motorsport shows, which I think are losing in popularity, is a concept that can really work and become a moving showcase for manufacturers, and then in the future for private individuals that have acquired such cars and want to do a 7-8 day rally with nice gastronomy and going to some old circuits that have been forgotten or that are unable to be used anymore because of noise restrictions, and we can bring those back to life as some of the historical venues. And so I think we are very actively working on that. It is one of SRO's big priorities, but we do not see right now the merging of both technologies working, and as it stands, circuit racing with electric GT cars on conventional circuits would not work. It only works in the Formula E kind of structure with the street circuits that make it a lot more impressive, that are purposely built for these types of machinery. So these are different avenues that we're pursuing in parallel, but for now not overlapping.
Yeah, okay. And just quickly, where can people find out about the GTX World Tour? Is this something that's yet to be announced, or has it already been announced?
We briefly announced it at the press conference in Spa last year, where we announced every year our new calendars and new projects. You can find some information about that on the SRO Motorsports Group website.
Awesome.
There is a little small description and a short presentation overview, but there will be a lot more coming out on the subject in the coming months. Again, the plan is to launch this in 2021, depending on the feedback we get from all the manufacturers that we're going to see independently in the months to come. But yeah, a lot more news on the subject to come, but you can find a short summary of it on the SRO Motorsport Group website.
Very good, nice. And so the question is, Marco, when do we see the GTX World Tour game?
Well, this was a surprise even to me. I'm the guy that knows these kind of things at the latest, so we'll think about it.
Yeah, nice. But in all seriousness, listening to Anthony there, we're in for a change no matter what. So what's the knock-on effect going to be for someone like Kunos? How are they going to tackle that? Are they going to head down more of a historic route, or do you think people will want that in their sims as well?
Well, do you want the politically correct answer, or
I want your honest
or
answer.
the genuine one?
Yeah, the genuine.
Do you see electric cars behind me?
Yeah.
Or look at that. So, as you know, I'm also in charge as the licensing guy in Kunos. So I'm at the last word in terms of the kind of content we put in our products. But jokes apart, To copy what Paul said before, all of us, even us in Kunos, joined the sim racing because we wanted to get the thrill and excitement to drive, at least virtually, those kind of cars that in a normal life with a normal job you actually can do. So this was the mission we had in Kunos since we started, sharing our passion and our capability to produce simulations that can result in the most thrilling virtual experience at driving. And we believe that the passion for motorsport is not just about the speed. It's also as Anthony said, also about the smell, the noise, the vibrations, all these things that can make the experience even more immersive. And this is something that in a simulation, with the limitations, of course, you have in a virtual world, you can reproduce. We don't believe that electric technology today is exciting as well. I believe that it is very, very important to divide the two things. I see that in just 2 or 3 months in lockdown, we saw everywhere in the world very good changes in terms of how nature responded to the lockdown. Cleaner air, water, we saw a lot of changes. And I believe that this change should be taken in the best possible consideration because it's about living. So for the daily usage of cars, the electric technology, hybrid, and all the technologies that can be alternative to the standard fuel consumed must be taken in consideration because it's about the quality of our life. Motorsport is a different thing because motorsport is not just innovation, is not just the best possible technology brought to the competition, to the motorsport, but is also about excitement. It's also about immersion. It's about the vibration you can feel when you are in the pit lane and you see and watch a car moving in front of you at 250 kilometers per hour. This is something that it's worth to be reproduced in a game because the game can allow you to feel yourself as a driver or can let you to entertain or get that kind of immersion that a real driver can get. Electric power means a crazy acceleration from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour is great because it's something that you can't achieve with a thermic engine today. It's great, but it's a different thing. So I believe that in terms of our relation with the environment, we need to take in the best possible way all the technologies that can improve our life, the quality of the environment and our life. I don't see anything particular happening in our world in sim racing because we want to bring emotions to people, and electric is everything but not emotional. So at least from our point of view, I think that on the long terms, we can start to bring some new technology content in our next products in order to bring both to our audience. But the day when we'll start to make an 100% electric simulation, this is not going to happen soon. At least not under my management.
Okay, well, look, armed with the information that you've had from Anthony and Marco, Chris and Paul, briefly, Chris and Paul, where would you like to see Sims heading in the next few years?
Well, I think, first of all, the whole point of a racing sim is to follow the real world. You're simulating racing. We obviously have lots of racing games that don't follow the real world, but that's not really what we're doing here. I don't see Kunos making, the follow-up to Wipeout or Mario Kart anytime soon. But as soon as electric racing is exciting in the real world, sim racers will be wanting to race it. That's the beautiful thing about man. We will race literally anything. You're on roller skates or a skateboard as a kid. You're As soon as you get your first bike, you want to find the kid from down the road and race him on that bike. It doesn't matter what it is. We love to compete against each other. And I think as soon as electric technology gets to a point where it's exciting enough, be that through speed or whatever mechanism it is that makes that exciting, I think we'll be simulating it. Whether that's soon or not, I don't know. The future of sim racing, I guess then in a short synopsis, is whatever the future of motorsport is.
And Paul?
Well, as everybody knows, I don't know what happened after 1979. So for me, what I'd like the future of sim racing to look like is a very firm look back onto historic content. We've got the motor car has been a wonderful thing since the beginning of time. We've got such a wide, varied variety of tasty different road race cars series. Although it's great to have the latest and greatest, and it's great to follow, as Chris said, and Marco and Anthony have said, about following current racing trends. I'd also love to see tapping in to that historic content, tapping into that wealth of history and passion and emotion. Plus, I don't know what the modern world looks like, so I always like historic things.
Very nice. Classic Paul Jeffrey answer that. Marco, just a quick question for you. I think many people would join me in saying what a great job you've done with ACC. But the driving experience, we're getting to a point now where the driving experience in Sims is pretty good, right? Some developers can do a really good job of the physics in game. But my question is, how good does it need to get, the driving experience? Does it need to get much better, or can it get much better? And then secondly, if we are at a point where we're probably we may be maxing out the potential of the physics engines, what's the next big innovation in simulations, in racing sims? I'll give you a quick anecdote of a friend of yours, Stefano. I was on a race department thread, and I was saying I was craving realism in terms of I wish my car could get damaged a lot more and I'd suffer from some terminal injuries or for my car. And Stefano popped up and said, how about we put some code in that if you crash your car too bad, we delete your hard drive, which I loved. And I said, that's brilliant. I would love that. But I'm not sure many people would love that. So what would you say is the next big thing to happen to race sims?
Well, Stefano said it, but then he left. So he left my responsibility. Yeah. These kind of things, I don't think people will be happy. But jokes apart, we believe that there is always margin for improvement. I think that in the last 10 years, we saw, not just in Kunos, but also all the other racing simulations has reached a very great level of depth, of accuracy and realism. But a marginal improvement is always there, because as the hardware capability rise up, we can get more resources to rise the frequency of the force feedback, for example, the frequency of the physics, so that we can make it always even more keen to the very last detail in terms of car reaction, handling, and things like this. Also in terms of visuals, it's the same, because the more the GPUs can achieve and manage more triangles, effects, and so on, we can add more post-processing effects, we can raise the resolution, and making crazy things with less limitations. In terms of artificial intelligence, there is a big margin of improvement, because at least in our products, where the AI use the same physics of the driver, the AI is very demanding in Assetto Corsa and Assetto Corsa Competizione. So the more resources in terms of hardware we can get in the future, we can make also a very good improvement in terms of neural AI, AI logics, in order to make it even more realistic. So I think that, not to mention, for example, the stability that multiplayer reached in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, today, when you watch a multiplayer race, you don't see barely any difference than a single-player race in terms of stability, car movements, and things like this. It's something that 5 years ago was not achievable. So there is a very big margin of improvement in any single area yet.
That's good to hear. And Chris and Paul, Chris, for you first, what would you say is like missing from every sim or the majority of sims that you would like to see? And again, same question to Paul after Chris.
The smell.
Yeah, there's some sensory stuff that's not there that tries to be replicated by various pieces of hardware that I always think come across as a bit gimmicky. Personally, I've never really gotten on with the haptic feedback stuff or the wind generators or anything. It all feels a bit of a step too far for me. But in terms of the actual software, I think there's a great article in Race Car Engineering this month. I think it came out yesterday. Sim racing on the front cover, incidentally. That should be a good hint that we're starting to be taken a lot more seriously in the wider motorsport industry. But one of the things that's touched upon is that, you know, tires are still a bit of a black art. I mean, they're a black art in motorsport circles. So a team understanding the tires is hard enough. The tire manufacturer understanding the tires may even be difficult. So let alone someone in Marco and Aris's position, you've got to make sense of this in a racing sim. And sometimes it works really, really well after, you know, months and months of chipping away at it, and it's amazing. And in other sims and on certain cars, it falls apart and doesn't work at all. So I still think, while we are an undoubtedly high watermark at the moment in terms of the feel of racing sims, there are still a few things that are quite inconsistent across titles and across even classes within titles sometimes as well.
Okay, Paul?
I think Marco hit the nail on the head earlier with AI. I think every single sim, ACC included, has still got improvements they can make to give it a lifelike experience racing against the AI. Not every driver races online. They may not have the internet connection. They may not have the time and capacity to go and invest themselves in an online race. So having an authentic offline experience against the computer AI, having them defend, which I think most sims have got that quite nice now, ACC in particular, defensive driving feels quite nice, but it's overtaking. It's the thrill, like when you're racing against a real driver, of defending your position, trying not to lose time. There still feels like there's a margin to go across the board, and neural AI, which was trialed in one of the bike games quite recently, or debuted, should I say, in sim racing or racing games. But that's a technology with a lot of travel still to go in that one. I'd like to see that. And also, Steve, you and I have talked about this offline times many over a beer, realism and difficulty. So I like the idea of being able to crash my car, get stuck in a gravel trap. Really, for those who want it, and this will have to be a toggleable option. Toggleable, that word? Option. So it's not for everybody, but super realism where you crash your car in FP1, you are done. You are not getting it back out and repaired in time for the race. And I love that ACC has brought some of that in with allocated tyre sets. So you've got to manage your strategy over a course or a race weekend, and you can't go out there in free practice, chuck new boots on it. But more and more. I want it to be as close to real as it gets.
Well, Paul, I've got an idea. How about if you crash a car so hard, we delete your hard drive?
Yeah, well, I do something similar. Because I've got limited time to get on the rig, I do something similar. That if I write my car off, there's absolutely no restarts unless the AI bugs out and does something daft. If I write my car off and it's not going to be repaired, I turn the rig off and go and do something I don't want to do, like the pots, and that adds a little bit of competition pressure because there is a consequence. I can't just restart and go again. My precious time to drive and enjoy myself, I will stop it, and that's sort of there.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Paul. We're on the same wavelength there, just more realism in general, really. But Marco, you touched on something just in your answer about AI and single-player modes. How important is single-player mode for Kunos and a career mode? I know that some of the guys in the chat on RD have asked about why do developers not really focus on a fully fledged career mode and focus on single player? Is it all about multiplayer now?
Well, I have to say that with Competizione, I joined the multiplayer races much than I ever did before. And it was just amazing. at that point that one day I was driving in a multiplayer race, and I remember I thought, who cares about single player anymore? But I had to admit that, yeah, I had to admit that if I didn't join the single player before, that led me to appreciate the depth of the simulation, the content, the graphics, and so on, maybe I would not care about to go for the following step, that is the multiplayer racing. So I believe that a lot of people, without a single player mode, they will not get the game anyway. So they will not join the multiplayer experience because they will not, or they will think that will not be interest to try and to play only multiplayer product. So I think that single player experience is still important, first of all, because there are a lot of people that live in places where the connection, internet broadband is not so great. And also because the single player led to understand and appreciate even more the multiplayer experience. So I think that we need to improve, not just as Kunos, but in general. We need to improve maybe the way how we made the career mode, thinking it in a wider way, that's for sure, in order to not give the feeling that we have a scripted experience. But in terms of overall experience, single player is still important.
Well, that's great news for me because I still play a lot of offline, and I saw Chris point at himself when Marco said, "Who cares about single player?" in his story. So yeah, that's great. It's great to hear that single player is gonna live on. So now turning to some questions from RD members, and forgive me, I'm reading from a script here because some of the names are pretty tricky. So the first question comes from Zaphod Cortez, and it's aimed at Anthony and Marco. And the question is, how much are manufacturers interested in sims? Do they care if their cars are represented faithfully? And were you pressured into making one specific car or a specific car better than the others?
No, they absolutely do not care. Next question. No, I'm joking. I mean, now that it's in the spotlight, I mean, I can tell you that the first couple of weeks, I had all of them on the phone. Everyone trying to find a way to gain a competitive advantage on the other. But in the end, you have to be firm and respect and trust in the hours of work that, Kunos put in to balancing the cars, which is, it's an enormous task. But whatever you do, balance of performance will always be a conversation, whether it's in real life or on the virtual side. It's natural. Everyone wants to win. All the manufacturers want to win. So they're all going to do the best they can to try and get an advantage. But the main difficulty with the manufacturers was really explaining them that, the pro real drivers, they're not quite pushing the cars in the virtual world to their limits. And actually, the experts are the sim drivers. And so when they're using pro drivers as reference for like, we're a bit slower than this manufacturer and that, they're like, well, you guys are 2.5 seconds or 2 seconds at the start of the sim drivers, the top time from sim driving. So yeah, I mean, it's always going to be a conversation, but that's the name of the game. And if you don't want competition, then you don't deal with that.
Interesting. And Marco, I know this really, I suppose, is a question for Aris, really. But how do you translate what's coming from the teams in putting it into the game?
Well, first of all, you need to consider a car manufacturer not just one entity, but with a box that includes so many different departments. So, for example, there are some departments that they care about the car design, that in the simulation must be reproduced correctly with all the details in place. There is the marketing department that cares about the sponsorships, so they care about the fact that all the stickers, the lines, deliveries must be done in a correct way. And then there are the motorsport department that, especially with Competizione, we saw a different approach than in the past. And as Anthony said, actually we nailed it because the car manufacturer and teams started to behave with the sim like they do in the real world because they want always to stay in the front of the pace. Since we work on data and we work through the last winters with the car manufacturers, with the CAD data, that actually give us all the information we need about the cars. Working as well as with the race engineers, with the telemetry and so on. We did what we believe is the best possible work we can do, but there is always marginal improvement. So when we started to have a competizione in early access on September 18, we started to have very good relationships with the race engineers and drivers. They had the chance to download the software at home or in their team and start to work and use it, and giving us a lot of suggestions or data or indications about the way how their cars behave. So the point is that everything is perfect, and then they join the competition and they see that, like in the real world, they believe their car is the best in the world, and they discover that it's not that. So by this point of view, we need to face exactly the same challenges that an organization like SRO must have when they decide about the ballast, BOP, and so on.
That's really interesting. And again, I suppose that's something that the average sim racing fan wouldn't really consider, is that must be a bit of a drain on resource and your time, and away from maybe something that you have planned. It's something that's insight that really we would never get if we didn't have you on here. So thanks for that. So a question for Paul. You're good at commentating. So I ask, have you been watching videos of commentators to prepare for the SRO AM Championship?
Well, firstly, thank you very much. Nice to hear. Talking is one of my strengths. Talking's my favourite thing. I like the sound of my own voice. I never run out of things to say, and often takes me 15 minutes to introduce myself. So it's always been kind of like a natural thing for me. Motor racing is my absolute passion. I adore it. I geek out and nerd out on it. The first time I met Chris Haye for the SRO Esports Series last year, we met in Heathrow Airport on the way to Monza, and it took us like 5 minutes to get on to early 1990s obscure Formula One drivers and teams. And as soon as we mentioned Maurizio Gugelmin, we were away, and that were a 3-hour conversation stopped when we got to Italy. So it's always been a natural thing for me. And commentating itself, it's just an extension of what I do when I bore people in the real world and just start talking about what's happening and what's going on. So yes, I've subconsciously done research because I've watched motor racing my whole adult life. But in terms of overtly sitting down and studying how people have done it, not really, because I try and have it as my own unique, authentic voice and not being a poor imitation of somebody else, if that makes sense. And when you're working alongside somebody like Martin Avon, who's obviously the voice of world touring cars, you just naturally get carried along with that enthusiasm anyway, so it's great.
That's great. Yeah, Martin's been brilliant alongside you. You've been a great partnership in the AM Championship. So hopefully we can continue that post-SRO AM Championship. But yeah, next question is for Anthony and Marco. And I feel like I'm going to just get a no comment here. But it was asked about 50 times, so I'm going to have to ask. Are there any plans for the following? Historic content, TCR, GTWC, Asia content?
Actually, the CLK GTR will feature pretty soon. No, that's definitely a question for Marco. So I leave that in his ball game.
The answer is haha. No, okay. No, I mean, a production like Competizione needs a very wide perception in terms of what you can produce, because it needs here to be achieved. So the Intercontinental GT track pack, the British pack, the GT4 pack that will arrive soon through this year, were scheduled far in advance. Now we are landing with Assetto Corsa Competizione also on console, and we need to see what will say the market about the game in order to take other decisions, because they are very, very challenging in terms of time cost, time production, and so on. So at the moment we stay focused on the current production, and then we'll see.
Good stuff. And I feel like this one might be a no comment or no answer at all. But again, asked many times, so I have to ask it. And it comes from Maharitika Putra Baliwa. Sorry for absolutely getting that terribly wrong, I'm sure. But Marco, will custom skins be implemented into the game on an official capacity? So that, again, was asked a number of times. I know there's the in-game livery editor, but I think the question comes from a place of esports teams who are competing in leagues and other things, want their branding on the cars. Is that likely to happen at all?
The short answer is no. I totally understand about their needs, but Competizione has been designed to be the official product of a fixed GT series. So at the very beginning, we had very strict limitations also from the manufacturers in terms of the freedom we had in reproducing liveries, schemes, and so on. So these restrictions became a bit lighter through the path. So it wasn't scheduled before, but we started to work on this editor in order to give some level of freedom to our users. But since it was not designed to be like that from the very beginning, and is a very complex part of the game architecture, especially using a real engine, huge modifications of the current system are not scheduled, and I don't see it happening soon.
Okay, so next question's from a RD member of staff, Paul Glover, and he asks Anthony, no real-life racing yet. From a marketing perspective, what has been the most challenging thing with having no racing? And have you been impressed with the quality of driving seen in the SRO Esports Championship so far?
I mean, absolutely. And, at the beginning of the year, we signed 2 big new partnerships. One with AWS as the presenting partner of the GT World Challenge, and Rebellion as official timekeeper. And, we're now in June and still haven't been racing. So obviously that was far from ideal. I have to say esports has really played a key role in allowing us to deliver marketing value to our new partners and existing partners. And also, real value with a very engaged audience. AWS has really been, delighted with the way that we've managed to integrate them within our esports championship. So yeah, it's been a real challenge, but esports definitely came as the savior. And on the quality side, I've been mind blown. We've seen some fierce competition and relentless defending. Notably, I think it was Hosseini has been unbelievable. And sometimes you blink and you forget that this is not real. And it's very easy when you remove the fear element you have of when you're in a car and you crash, you can get injured. Once you remove that, it's easy to drive in a foolish way. But you can see that there's a real respect between the drivers and it's simulation. So the fear is almost simulated in the game. And so I think everyone that's been relatively new to esports, has been extremely impressed with the quality of driving in some of the championships. And I think the SRO esports in particular has seen some very clean racing.
Yeah, absolutely. Even in the AM Championship, it's such a shame that they're classed as amateurs because they really are fantastic as well. I'm really looking forward to the final round later today. But one quick question for Marco from EC1. I'll just paraphrase it and just sum it up as Stefano has left. And what's been the biggest challenge with his departure?
Well, I miss Stefano by 7 years now when we left Vallelunga for Philippines and then Netherlands because working face to face was just great. But in terms of challenging, Stefano is one of the 2 founders of Kunos and he's a very responsible guy. So the decision to left the team didn't came at the very last minute, but it was something that we discussed in the last year and a half. So when Stefano decided to leave, he did everything was needed in order to allow the team to work without him, actually. If in Assetto Corsa 1 he wrote the 95% of the code, of the overall code of the game, in Competizione he wrote possibly the 5% of the game, the code. Because he managed the rest of the programming team in order to let them to learn and to improve the way how we work as a team. So, by this point of view, we don't see major challenges because Stefano is definitely the most brilliant person I ever worked with in terms of programming. But he raised up a very good, actually a great programming team, and he did everything we need in order to move forward with the production also in the next few years. What it's changed a lot is that we started the company in 4 people, actually, in 2006. And for many years, we always worked in emergency mode, because of the lack of resources, the lack of people, the lack of money, the lack of time. So even when we started to raise more resources, more people, and so on, we were used to work by so many years in this sort of emergency way that we didn't manage sometimes things in a more relaxed way, and we didn't take the proper time to organize better some the bigger milestones. This is something that we are changing a lot in the last year, and this is a very long-term process that we are still improving. So possibly this is the organization inside Kunos is the biggest challenge we are facing, but it's something that is bringing the first results, very encouraging results, so we are fine with that.
Very nice. And Stefano is, of course, missed, and I wish him all the best with his new projects, whatever they may be. The final serious question, you could say, is one for Chris Haye. And the question says, as someone who doesn't develop games, if you were in a developer's shoes and was given a budget for a racing game, what would you do? Aim for mass market or do something a bit more niche, or perhaps something that's not been done before?
Oh, well,
I'm all ears.
Well, if anyone, I'll pitch this to any sim developer, but Marco gets first refusal. Have you heard of a series called Group C? Quite popular. Anyway, honestly, I think I'd have to give a really boring answer to that and put my marketing hat on and go and look at what's not being particularly provided for at the moment. And I think that's what Codemasters have gone and done. They're bringing back the touring car franchise from a long time ago. They've obviously decided there's a need for that. There's obviously probably going to be some nostalgia element in there as well. So maybe we could see that Group C game. The 1980s World Sports Car Championship. If anyone wants to do that, I'll be an early access backer for that, I think.
That's another classic Chris Haye style answer. That go and assess the market and do a gap analysis. Fantastic. Just to round off, we've got a few fun questions that you can answer pretty quickly. So the first is from BGIL66. It's to Chris. Favorite guitar riff of all time?
Oh God. Crazy Train, Ozzy Osbourne, has to be.
Very nice. I had one lined up here for Marco, GT4 content, but we've already answered that one, so very good stuff. Anthony, if you could add any event or circuit to the IGTC calendar, what would it be?
I have to say it's a tough one, but I think there can only be one answer, and because we've covered everything, and it's San Luis, Argentina.
Very nice.
Nice answer.
Yeah. And finally, this one comes from, I'm guessing, Kryptonite to Paul. Do you find enough time to race for fun with all the stuff that's going on RD? Because there is a few changes going on and that we're doing a lot of stuff. Are you finding time to race?
Short answer, no. Not at all, unless I'm doing something for a particular piece of content. But like Chris, I'm sure it'll be exactly the same. The more you get involved in it, the less you actually do the thing that got you started in the first place. So very rarely, sadly.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap it up there. All that's left to say is thank you to our panel for joining us today. It's been great to hear what you've had to say about the future of sim racing and motorsports. And thank you to everyone at home for tuning in and watching. Please follow us on social media at RaceDepartment and follow us on Twitch, where you can see the final of the SRO Esport GT Am Championship in just a few moments' time. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.